Hey guys, so I am so grateful that I was invited to an early screening of The Night House so I could get you this review up the day it comes out in theaters, which is today. So this is a movie that I wasn't really anticipating this year, and I'm not sure why. I just hadn't seen any trailers or heard anything about it, but then like the day before I saw the movie, I saw it starred Rebecca Hall, who I love because she's in The Gift, and also Christine. So I love her work and her acting. So I got really excited, but I was trying to keep my expectations to a minimum because I wanted to go in with nothing and not knowing anything about this movie so I could fully experience it. But this movie follows a recently widowed Beth, played by Rebecca Hall, who inherits the lake house her husband built. She begins digging into her husband's belongings, looking for answers after disturbing visions and dreams. Now, this is described as a psychological horror movie, but I will say that it is definitely a more of a slow burn thriller, definitely on the psychological side too. It doesn't have a ton of horror elements, and I feel awkward saying that because it does, but like it's not. I review horror movies for a living, but I'm just saying don't expect like a lot of horror in this movie. It is a slower burn, and it's something that you're definitely going to have to give your full attention to experience all of the psychological aspects. Now, The Night House is a very symbolic and beautiful story, and it really kept me interested throughout the whole movie and all of the metaphors used in this, and it basically symbolizes grief and loss, which to me is very similar to The Babadook because I feel like it has an element of grief that is a big metaphor in what is the horror elements, and this movie is kind of similar to that. They're not similar movies by any means, but there's the fact that it's like symbolic of grief and depression and things like that. So to me, it makes, well, first off, let me just say I loved this movie. It was so good, and I'm so happy I went in without any hopes or expectations because I feel like it really allowed me to take in this movie for what it was and really appreciate all of the artistic choices and the performances from the actors. It was phenomenal. And it makes a lot of sense why I would like this movie because the director, David Bruckner, who made a segment in VHS, the first one, and also Southbound, which are two anthology horror movies that I love. He also directed The Ritual, which is one of my favorite underrated horror movies, which I will be doing a book versus adaptation video on that specifically later on. So to me, it makes sense because I like his work generally, and I had no idea that he was the one that directed this until after I had seen it. So if you like the tone and the pacing of The Ritual, this movie's not similar to that in story or anything, but it is similar in like pacing and tone a little bit. I feel like David Bruckner is really effective in building the psychological tension and like having thriller-esque vibes, if you will. Now, I did mention it's a little bit of a slower movie, but I do feel like one of the things that it's very effective in is the pacing because I got nervous when it would be kind of slower points. They're really spending a lot of time building up the psychological elements that it would become too much of a slow burn, which I'm not opposed to, but then it would become a movie that's not really rewatchable to me. But it was broken up perfectly with all of the horror elements, and I really enjoyed the horror elements. They didn't push it too far, and the symbolism in it just was really, really effective for me. I thought this movie got a little bit predictable towards the end, but I was pleasantly surprised when it went kind of a different route. I am not going to be doing spoilers in this video because it comes out today. I assume none of you have seen it yet, or very few of you have seen it yet. Maybe you saw it last night, but no spoilers in this video. But I will say that it's not as predictable as you might think, and the ending really surprised me with the change that I don't know how to describe it without spoiling anything, but it definitely goes somewhere that I was not expecting, and I really, really loved the execution of the end of this movie. I feel like it was so satisfying, and some of the visuals were incredible. I know this concept in general of like having a story about grief and having a lot of metaphors throughout isn't necessarily original or creative. However, the way it was executed and some of the visuals used in this, the negative space visuals, oh my gosh, I was obsessed with. I feel like the way that the story played out and everything felt very unique and like an original experience, and definitely I think one of my favorite horror movies that I've seen so far this year. I gave it 4 stars out of 5, which is really good. And I know I'm kind of being a little vague in this, and you probably still have no idea what this movie's really about, but that's, I think, the best way to watch this movie, because it's just better not knowing much about it and going in with as little information as possible. Now, all of that being said, I do want to say it does have jump scares in it, which I was not expecting, and boy did they follow through. Like, the jump scares in this were perfect. I actually really enjoyed them. Like, it made me jump at least 3 to 4 times, and I'm usually really good at calling jump scares, and these completely took me by surprise and caught me off guard. Like, if you're used to predicting jump scares, you won't with this one, trust me. And I feel like the ones in this movie really hold a purpose, and it's not just to startle the viewer, but they do come back into play and they make sense, and they not necessarily follow through with like extra horror at the end, but it just works in this story. Now, another thing that makes this not fully 5 stars for me and makes it not really a perfect movie is the fact that it does get a little bit convoluted and a little confusing towards the end. And I like that they didn't spoon feed the viewer the answers, because it kind of leaves it up for interpretation a little bit. I mean, there's an explanation, but it's not very direct, which is a good and a bad thing. Now, the explanation in the end and the way it like wraps up the story is enough, so it makes sense, but you might have to like look into it afterwards. At least I did. And I feel like there's no shame in that. It's not like I didn't get it. It was just I wanted a little bit more clarification. I feel like it needed a little bit more of, you know, explanation, going a little bit more into detail. But I also appreciated the fact that it didn't feel the need to do that. I know that's very confusing, because it's like, what do you want? What do you want? There's certain scenes that could be very cliche, and they don't go that route. They don't go, it's not like too on the nose for what the story actually is, which is really nice and refreshing. They trust the viewer to like get it, you know, and not everyone does. I saw some reviews hate this movie because they didn't understand it. I don't know if they knew that it was like a metaphor or symbolic, but I think a little bit more of a direct explanation or a little bit clarification in subtle ways would have helped this movie a little bit more. But that's just my personal taste and preference. I did really like that they trust the viewer though, and they didn't over-explain and they didn't go super cliche so we would understand more. I liked the ambiguity, I guess, or like vagueness of some of the lines in the end that like wrap up the story. I don't know. I thought it was really good. Overall, like I said, this is one of my favorite movies that I've seen this year so far. Obviously, we're not done with the year and we have so many good movies coming up, but I highly recommend you see The Night House in theaters, because not only is it like a psychological and visual experience, but I think it's honestly an auditory experience. I don't think that's, I was gonna say as weird as that sounds, I don't think that sounds weird. I think you know what I mean when I say it's an auditory experience, because some people think that the auditory elements, I guess, are a little too much. Maybe it would be a little overstimulating for some people. I really liked it. I thought it was very effective in building tension, and the emotions that you go through. It just makes you relate to the characters so much, and obviously assists in the horror elements. But please check out The Night House if you're into kind of slower burn psychological thrillers with some really good horror elements. This movie is just so good. Once you watch The Night House, or if you have seen it already, please leave your thoughts down in the comments. I would love to hear your guys' opinion about this movie, what you thought about it, what you think about the ending. Make sure you flag your comment though for spoilers, you know, put a little text in there, spoilers, if you want to talk about spoilers. But yeah, let me know what you thought about this movie. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.